at the National Museum of Scotland. The presentation today is entitled New Displays, New Vision, Art and Design at NIS. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anita, and thanks to Anita and Klaus for inviting me to talk to you today about what the National Museum of Scotland is currently undertaking on the decorative art and design front. I feel a little bit like an introvert because, conspicuously, I won't be speaking very much, if at all, apart from glancingly, about Scottish textiles or the 19th century, but mercifully, in the audience, Lisa Mason, who's in the same department as I am, and is working quite hard on our fashion and textile gallery, may be able to fill in some of the blanks. But I think I ought to say something about the National Museum of Scotland structure so that you understand it, because as a visitor, it presents different levels of kind of interaction with the objects, some of which reflect my departmental identity, but the remainder reflecting other types of kind of collections organisation. So today, when we saw Dan, the image of Dan working on the loom, that's contained within the National Museum of Scotland collection, within the Scottish collections, and we have a Department of Scottish History and Archaeology that overlaps a little bit with art and design and overlaps also quite considerably with science and technology. So for the public visiting museums, they're not always sure where the collections lie. I don't have control over those technical pieces of machinery that inform our knowledge of textile production, and that's not something that will be featured at all really in our galleries. And Alex Hayward, the keeper of science and technology, who is leading on the science and technology galleries that are being developed at the same time as the art and design galleries, is looking at how he can get that the loom technology particularly into his sequence of galleries. And what we hope is that there'll be a kind of synergy, a connection between the different collection areas that will be seamless for the mass of the visiting public. So I'm going to start by giving you an overview of what the collections, where the collections will lie. I'm dealing particularly with, I suppose, European decorative art and design from around, say, the late Middle Ages, from about 1200, right through to the modern day. So we deal with a range of materials, rather like the Victorian Albert Museum. We deal with stained glass, metalwork, jewellery, sculpture, furniture, and of course fashion and textile. National Museums of Scotland is one of the world's kind of most coherent, I guess, encyclopedic museums. So we have natural sciences, science and technology, world cultures, and of course art and design. So we represent all of those sort of major collecting areas that formed our great museums in the 19th century. And this is our designers' take on how the collections areas might look. For those of you familiar with the museum, you might recognise that this is one of the large kind of atria. Most of our collections in what was the Royal Museum, in the Victorian body of the original museum, are arranged in these atria that rise to 3 levels. You can just see at the bottom of the slide, that's the ground floor level that will contain the fashion and textile gallery. That's the gallery within the stack that has, of course, a continuous footprint and isn't interrupted as a balcony gallery. So those balcony galleries present certain challenges for us. This is one of the reasons why, although we'll be exploring the processes, we can't really introduce the hardware that produced the fabrics and textiles that we'll be displaying. So there'll be 3 galleries arranged in this stack, and a 4th gallery arranged in an adjacent area, which is currently occupied by a gallery of Eastern art, known as the Ivy Room Gallery or the Looking East Gallery. And you'll also just get a measure from this. So this, of course, is all work in progress. It's changed drastically even since this was put together. But you'll see that each floor is given a slightly different character. So the idea is that the designers are giving each space its own look and feel. And this is a section through that atrium, giving you an impression of the types of design solutions that we might employ in order to give the space a dynamism and a kind of energetic juxtaposition of materials and display options. The fashion and textiles will form the gallery with the largest footprint actually of the four that we're developing. We have a very important collection. Those of you who have visited the site in recent years might not realise that because it is conspicuous by its absence. We've got one of the largest and most comprehensive collections in the country. At the moment, items are displayed embedded within galleries that have got different themes. So for instance, the yellow mantua court dress there, bottom right, is in a gallery termed European Styles, and it's in a case discussing the Rococo style. But what we're going to do is have a dedicated fashion and textile gallery. It won't be dealing with fashion and textile as a history of fashion. It will not be a chronological arrangement, it will be a thematic arrangement. But what Lisa and the other curators working on this gallery are doing is that they're looking very closely at how these narratives can work in an imaginative, creative way, and how they can demonstrate the whole process of fashion from production, inception, design, retail. So there will be a lot of process in this gallery as far as we can accommodate it. We want to talk about techniques of textile production. The mantua court dress is shown here actually a two of, I think, 4 or 5 that we have in this 4. And of course they make a very kind of dramatic display. One of the themes that we'll be using that we'll be illustrating through the mantua court dress is this whole idea of body shape and changing body shapes and body image. So those are the kinds of narratives that we'll be developing through consulting the historic breadth of the collections. And then this gives you an idea of the more kind of up-to-date items that we have. All the more avant-garde, because the bottom slide there is from the 1940s. It's by an Italian designer, Bianca Mosca. And it's an extremely, I think it's something that belies its date in a way, because of the way it's got this very kind of modern outlook to it. And I think it's based on wartime coupons or vouchers. It's got this kind of political message to it. So one of the themes that we'll also be exploring in the gallery is looking at the avant-garde and looking at these kind of issues surrounding fashion. That might be about ethical issues, or it might be about fashion as art. And when I term the title of my talk, New Displays, New Visions, we're challenging ourselves to think about ways of how we can make the collections sing a sort of new tune, if you like, and think about very much how we can perhaps look at the interface between design, contemporary art, contemporary craft, and certainly the interface between science and technology and art and design. I think that's one of the great selling points of the National Museum of Scotland, that we have these very rich, diverse collections under one roof, and we're working very closely with science and technology to make sure that we get that vista into the experience of production and design. And so a little slide here demonstrates something of the process side of the narrative. These slides relate either to the Jean Muir archive or the Bernard Klein archive, two extensive archive collections that comprise not just garments, but drawings, designs, swatches of fabric, the whole gamut really of the creative process. Bernard Klein will be the subject of a temporary exhibition, timetable for 2017, that will exploit this wonderful kind of archive that shows his great value as a colourist and as a technician, as a technological brain. Jean Muir, likewise, we see the whole kind of artistic creative process through her drawings and of course the finished garments and accessories, including jewellery and acrylic and other diverse materials. And this again has changed. This is an idea of how the floor plan might look It has changed quite dramatically since then, actually, but it gives you a notion of what kind of impact the gallery will have. It will be on the ground floor of that Victorian wings I mentioned, and it will be one of the first points of connection with our collection stack. And we imagine it will have a great visitor draw. I mean, it's the first time we've had a dedicated fashion and textile gallery, I think, for at least 10 or 12 years. And we've never had the volume of material that we'll be putting out before. We're also consciously and quite ambitiously collecting contemporary material because we really want to amplify the collections as best we can. And one of the great investments that the museum made, really, for the department was to allow me to recruit a senior curator of modern contemporary fashion and textile. That's a great addition to our team. I should have said from the outset that my department is new. It is only a little bit more than a year old. And again, that's giving a very kind of strong message to where the collections are going, particularly over the next 4 years as these galleries develop. I'm deliberately not using our working titles. We do have working titles for each of the galleries, but I've chosen something that's just descriptive of the content. So I said that the galleries won't be a chronological relation of the history of design, but there is an overarching chronology that groups particularly the decorative art and design stacks together. So we have, for instance, a gallery that will tell the stories that kind of inhabit this orbit of 1950 to the present day. This is very much our contemporary design gallery, contemporary modern. And it will include things such as pots by far left, Lucy Ree, Hannes Koper, this wonderful pendant, second in from the right at the top, designed by George Brack in 1965. Again, showing that interface between craft and art. Eduardo Palotz's plates produced for Wedgwood in the early 1970s, about 1972. Palozzi experimenting not just with design but with the technical application of screen printing onto plates. So we're looking where we can always at the technological interface with design. And this shows that more kind of contemporary edge where artists, particularly makers, are looking at new materials. So they're using, of course, lots of plastics with names that I can't pronounce, and using new methods of production such as 3D printing. So the table second in is produced by a process of fused deposition modeling, which is essentially 3D printing. The bowl, the large bowl, bottom left, is a milled aluminium bowl, and in fact the bulk of the material, the actual bullion, if you like, of the aluminium when it was brought in, took 7 men to carry it before it was milled. So it's an absolutely phenomenal achievement to have this bowl spun from that huge bulk of aluminium. That's by an artist called Robin Masterton. It celebrates the 60th anniversary of Fausto Coppa's win of both the Giro d'Italia and the Tour de France. So it's kind of commemorative bowl, and you see how it's not functional. I suppose that's really one of the points I want to make about this, is that the gallery will be exploring the design of items that have got an artistic identity as well as a functional, and this is really where the overlap between design and contemporary art is at its most vigorous. And this is the challenge, really, is how to accommodate all of these materials on a balcony gallery, where we're blessed, actually rather more blessed than colleagues in science and technology, in that we've got quite wide balconies here. So you can see the designers are playing around with the idea of having island cases around that balcony circumference. And the idea here ought to be that we're exploring the idea of the studio artist, the development of the studio artist in that post-war period, and also the implementation of design in industrial processes. And at the top of that huge Victorian architectural stack, we're going to be exploring, if you like, the birth of design identity from the 1850s onwards, so from that period of the Great Exhibition right through to the post-war, post-Second World War period. And that's just a view, I think, the previous speaker's image of the Crystal Palace was much more dynamic than this one. But, sorry? So So, anyway, this of course is a pivotal moment in terms of not just the debate around design reform, but also the democratisation of design, which is tied in with the whole mass production, industrialisation phenomenon really that's kicking off in the 19th century particularly. So we'll be massing up objects that demonstrate something of that, and I'll just point out the Staffordshire flatback figure, bottom left, which is the sort of ornament that was produced routinely in the 19th century to ornament fairly modest, ordinary homes. And I think we forget really that the amount of decoration that people used to employ in their domestic interiors was very, very minimal until the 19th century, until this stuff was being produced. And this, of course, does imply an element of democratisation of design in markets, and that more and more it is being made accessible to a greater and greater level of the population. And the top left slide is a Parian porcelain figure that shows the ability, again through scientific innovation, to scale down colossal classical statuary and give it a domestic scale for a fairly respectable middle class interior, rather than the aristocratic palace that this would have been normally ornamented in its full scale. One thing I also said at the beginning is that one of the reasons why I'm not really alluding very much to Scottish textiles in the context of these galleries is because the galleries do have very much an international European tone to them. And where you want to explore the Scottish stories and the stories of Scottish manufacture, you'll find those stories in the National Museum of Scotland collection areas. And at the moment, these stories are told through either film or through the installation of the large looms in those spaces. Now those sequences of galleries will have their own phase of development, probably around, I think we'll probably be about 2018, 2020, something like that. They're now about 15 years old for it, but we won't be disturbing the integrity of those displays too much for our new galleries. And I mention that here because it's a similar story rather to the Charles Benny Mackintosh story, and I illustrate Mackintosh top left, where we feel that Mackintosh exists best in an international design story. So where we are extracting him from the Scottish displays and putting him into our European decorative art and design displays, so that we can put him in proper juxtaposition with the secessionist artists and other art reform movements of the 19th century. And that's really what this slide illustrates. It's this, the narrative of design reform and design debate in the 19th century, of which Mackintosh has got such an essential and important part. And this gives you some idea of the diversity of forms that will be included in that gallery. The bottom left being in a way the most kind of fun and the streamlined of these, and that is by a secessionist Viennese ceramic artist. But this brilliant sort of Norman Bell Geddes cocktail set, which is everything about the streamlining of the modern age. So this is the kind of narrative that we'll be broaching here, right from 1850 right up to the 1950s, through that machine age, that modernistic strand. So it should be a very dynamic display. And this gives you an idea of how that might look with X-case furniture out on display. That's the other, of course, connection with the textile content is through the upholstery of some of the furniture that we have. And that, of course, represents its own conservation challenges. But at the moment, we're looking to have things displayed X-case. The great serendipity about having that narrative housed in the top of the stack is that it's embedded most meaningfully in the architecture, because the architecture of the National Museum of Scotland in that Victorian limb is, of course, a complete consequence of the architectural development of the Crystal Palace, and relates very closely to that. So there's a great kind of appropriateness of having this under that cast iron and glass vault, and this narrative will work very well there. And then finally, the gallery that wasn't illustrated with that architectural elevation is the gallery dedicated to European decorative arts from about 1200 to about 1850. This will be in a self-contained room, no current residing room overlooking East Gallery. And this really will be the kind of the museum's treasure house, if you like. This is where our historic collection strengths will be shown to great advantage, including, of course, I am actually a medievalist by background, so I couldn't resist putting in the Limoges enamel casket top left, which is one of our medieval treasures. But our real strengths are Renaissance and later. So huge collection strengths in Italian Maiolica, which you see secondary from the left, excuse me, the top there. And great works of silver, Scottish and European silver, and of course new acquisitions, including middle right, the Hamilton Rothschild taxi, which was acquired in 2012, and relates to the story of the Hamilton collection, and is a very rare sardonyx Byzantine bowl mounted by the 10th Duke, Hamilton, the 10th Duke of Hamilton, with gold mounts from the 17th century, from a monstrous sort of fusion object, great sort of gentlemanly collection object, with great mystique about it, believed to have been at some point by Charlemagne. And these panels too relate to Hamilton panels. Never been out of display before, so we're doing some quite ambitious structural work in there too. It's a great opportunity for us to get things out that have either not been out for generations, or as in this instance, that these were acquired in the 1990s, but there's not been an opportunity to put them out on display until now. Carved in about 1690 by William Morgan. It's a great somebody studied with Bryn Gibbons. And we get, on the tapestry topic, we get out this amazing historic early 16th century Brussels tapestry of the Triumph of Prudence, which in itself is a big conservation project, and it's likely to go to Brussels actually for conservation. I won't dwell too much on these, but there is a conservation story on the sofa bottom middle slide. This is a great conservation project. It needs to be reupholstered. We're going to film the reupholstery of it, and that will be part of the interaction in the galleries. And then this just gives you an idea of the mass of objects that will be in there. Because apart from the fact that we're exploring these stories that relate to, I suppose, the opulence and the princely patronage that surrounds commissioned objects rather than mass-produced objects, we're also looking at strands of mass production within that, because of course the chronology embraces both the pre-industrial and the post-industrial world. So particularly the ceramic science illustrates something of those processes, and we'll be featuring the rise of Josiah Wedgwood in this gallery too, and featuring particularly his copy of the porcelain vase, which is something we have in collections from the 1790s, one of those early rare pieces of 50 produced by Wedgwood. And then this just gives you an idea of where it will be. Again, that doesn't look too exciting, I'll grant you, but in fact, in terms of architectural innovation, architectural intervention, it is quite a significant gallery for us. So this is where the grand gallery is. We're puncturing through the original doorway openings that have been sealed for years, and we're opening up the far end too. So the whole space will be a much more kind of breathable open space. The escalator you see is one that's already in place, and for those of you who visit the museum, you'll normally arrive at the top level into a sort of boxed-in area. All of that boxing in will disappear, and you'll enter into this very opulent, splendid area. And we plan to open in 2016, date yet to be announced. A long science and technology, but thank you very much.